Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 28th of May, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today is my co-host, Charles Mallet, who'll be talking about food biosecurity, censorship from the UK Ministry of Defence, Starlink's expansion plans. We're also joined by researcher and activist Sandy Adams. She'll be discussing recent attempts to brainwash the people of Glastonbury and to turn the town into a World Heritage Site. And also with us is journalist and peace campaigner Vanessa Beeley, who's going to give latest analysis of the situation in Gaza, as well as the ongoing rebranding of terrorists in Syria, particularly Jelani. Now, I'm going to a little bit on online safety shortly, but let's get started with King Charles in Canada yesterday, because he was in Canada yesterday for a quick visit to deliver the so-called speech from the throne. The Carney regime rolled out the red carpet and brought the carriage and throne out of mothballs to host the king, who was mainly there apparently as a reaction to Donald Trump's demands on Canada. Now, reasserting Canada's sovereignty is how many were putting it in their coverage of it. The speech from the throne is the equivalent of the King's Speech here in the UK, and it represents the state opening of Parliament. And in Canada, it's normally delivered by the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec. But as with the King's Speech here, the words aren't written by the King. They're written on his behalf, on behalf of the ruling regime, probably by a team of civil servants. But it's interesting, we never actually get to know who writes the actual words. So let's, however, listen to the first few words out of Charles' mouth when he delivered a speech yesterday.
Honourable Senators, members of the House of Commons, it is with a deep sense of pride and pleasure that my wife and I join you here today as we witness Canadians coming together in a renewed sense of national pride, unity and hope. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation. While continuing to deepen my own understanding, it is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
Now, that's very interesting that he was asked to say those words, and perhaps embarrassing that he was asked to say those words, because the British royal family has questions to answer over the treatment of Indigenous children there. In 2022, when Charles visited Canada as Prince of Wales, he was reminded by Roseanne Archibald, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, of the so-called national scandal. I'd say it's much stronger. The national scandal doesn't go strong enough for this, of thousands of Indigenous children who died or were abused in the residential school system from the 19th century until as late as the 1970s. Now, in 2021, hundreds of human remains were discovered at former church-run schools, and these were all Anglican church-run schools. And as King, Charles is Supreme Governor. And despite the excuse of this being a largely ceremonial role, he carries the can effectively. So because the role, as I say, is described as largely ceremonial, there's an acknowledgement of at least part of the role. So I've completely messed that up. I've lost my thread there. But anyway, during that 2022 visit, Charles said, "We must find new ways to come to terms with the darker and more difficult aspects of the past, acknowledging, reconciling and striving to do better." And some of the same type of language being used in the speech from the throne then, but there's no apology. There's no apology then and no apology since. So if there's to be a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, maybe that would be a good place to start. But we should not forget that the abuse doesn't end with Indigenous people. Even the elites have been on the receiving end of it in Canada. And Prince Andrew's, quote, dear friend, Father Keith Gleed, a paedophile and Anglican priest who served as chaplain at the elite Lakefield College School between 1974 and 1980, this is something else that needs to be discussed. And Andrew himself met at Lakefield. They remained such good friends that Andrew invited the Reverend to both his 21st birthday party and to his wedding to Sarah Ferguson. And shortly before Gleed died of cancer in 2021, Andrew travelled to his hospital bed to say goodbye. And this was described at the time as surely a testament of true friendship. So then, of course, there's the issue of 100,000 children sent to Canada from UK orphanages to serve as farm workers and domestic servants. Well, you may ask, what's this got to do with Charles? Well, Bernardo's was responsible for much of the child trafficking at the time. And as the current patron, we'll just bring her on screen. If we look at who the current patron is, it is, of course, Queen Camilla, and before her, Queen Elizabeth. The royal family continues to occupy the monarchy, Charles. They continue to remain silent on the criminal actions effectively being done in their names if they're prepared to be patrons for these types of things, or they're prepared to consider certain people to be friends and so on. And I would, Charles, say that this silence has to be taken as consent at the very least, if not complicity. And there should be accountability. I don't know what your thoughts would be.
Well, I think the significance of the apology in the sort of wider context has been devalued over the last few decades because people have been climbing over each other to apologise for things that they absolutely, definitely did have nothing to do with, in that they were usually very much politicised and relating to a period in history they could not possibly have influenced. But here we're talking about something completely different, something that did directly involve the people that you have just been speaking about. And I think that's one part. I think the other part is the reference to a role being ceremonial. Well, one might say, and we talked about this earlier, that the role of monarch is largely a ceremonial one yet now, and yet it's beyond doubt that the royal family, particularly the king, does continue to have and pushes for a great deal of influence in the lives of those that are certainly within this country and in overseas territories. So it does seem like a question of wanting to have it both ways, which I think is highly inappropriate, for want of a better word.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move on to farming and biosecurity then. And just a few days ago, the UK government announced that from the 1st of July, farmers will be able to move animals around England without a blue tongue license. Is that exactly what's going on?
That is what's going on. And the way I think I would put it is that the biosecurity state, as we've come to know it, is evolving. And we see this tweet here from APHA, who are moving into a state of complete control via the inherent corruption of the system which underpins it. And it's possible to track this shift from killing everything, the slaughter on suspicion policy, to vaccinating everything. And the APHA continues to assume more and more control over the outcomes for livestock, as you say here, tweeting about the restriction of the blue tongue zone covering all of England, of course, agricultural policy now being a devolved matter. This means that what are called movement tests will not be required. Now, in an email to who they're calling stakeholders, it's made perfectly clear that the reason for this is an expectation that one of 3 vaccinations will be used on animals deemed susceptible. And here we see an encouragement to discuss vaccination with your vet, as though there may be more than one outcome from such a discussion. Now, all available vaccines are authorised on an emergency basis, according to the Veterinary Medicines Regulations 2013. And to better understand what happens if one does follow the science, it's Schedule 4 that contains the key detail. And they say that an animal may be treated with any one of these things in order to avoid unacceptable suffering. So effectively, this is where a vaccine doesn't already exist. They may use a product for another species or for another condition in the same species. They may use a human medical product authorised in the United Kingdom. They may use a product authorised in any other country for use in any food-producing animal species, or they may even use a product produced extemporaneously by a pharmacist, a veterinary surgeon, or a person holding a manufacturing authorisation. In other words, for that last one, someone who's basically guessing with absolutely no research and no preparation. So one might think that with goalposts that far apart, it's little wonder that investment in vaccines has increased so significantly in recent years. And this is what Bill Gates had to say about his own involvement.
Invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. And it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Well, it's pretty impressive that when you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector, get the delivery system so they're really getting the coverage out there, you literally save millions of lives. And 20 years ago, when we created these new multilateral organizations, Gavi for the vaccines, Global Fund for HIV, TB and malaria, we didn't know they'd be successful. They've gone through lots of challenges about making sure the money gets there, making sure the efficiency is right. But as we look at upcoming replenishments for those, and we've got so much distraction politically that the international needs like this could get eclipsed if we're not careful. We see a phenomenal track record. It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
Now, if you're listening and not watching, then I should tell you that for the last bit there where he was talking about the money, he couldn't help but break into a broad smile, because really that's what it's all about. And hand in hand with the requirement for vaccination has to be the demonstration of a threat, emergent or endemic, which is where the Animal and Plant Health Agency comes in. And this is what they say about their role. So as you listen, take a note of the specific language that they use.
APHA's role in controlling blue tongue is that we have the responsibility for controlling animal disease in Great Britain. It's our job to detect cases as they come through, so farmers and vets will report suspicion of disease to us. We'll then go out and look at those animals. We'll take the samples, send them to Pirbright. They are the lead laboratory for blue tongue.
So the Pirbright Institute has a wide range of expertise, ranging from not only the laboratory testing aspect, but also around modelling of disease outbreaks, culicoidal surveillance, and really supporting disease control. So they're now really preparing ourselves for an outbreak later this year, spread by the culicoides midge, and is able to infect all known ruminant species, including cattle, sheep, goats, and camelids.
There we go. Responsibility for controlling animal disease, he said, which is done via testing and the use of the lab at Pirbright. Now, that video was published last year, and it illustrates perfectly how the required outcome may be achieved. Funded in part by the government, the Pirbright Institute here boasts via the UK RI of combating animal disease, and they go on to crow about attracting international investment, citing a $5.5 million investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation back in 2019 to establish the Livestock Antibody Hub. This funding is channeled through the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, a bit of a mouthful, the BBSRC. And there has since been a partnership between them and the Gates Foundation, as well as the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, investing a further $40 million into Pirbright. So bearing in mind Gates is expecting a 20-fold return on such an investment, it should be perfectly obvious that accepting such funding is completely inappropriate, and it compromises every process which occurs thereafter. Now, I mentioned this on the 8th of May last year. The vaccines themselves may freely enter the food chain. This note from the European Medicines Agency refers to the inclusion of adjuvants, aluminium hydroxide and saponin, and goes on to say that the withdrawal period is 0 days, meaning that an animal may be jabbed and milked in the same day. So bolstering the narrative is the 2023 Biological Security Strategy with a foreword from Oliver Dowden, in which he wrote that our world is increasingly vulnerable to biological threats with catastrophic impacts, whether it's another pandemic, a terrorist attack, or antimicrobial resistance. So it's the intimation that climate change is the ring to rule them all, and in each instance, the government is the answer. Now, there are multiple references to the threat posed by zoonotic spillover, which we're told is the transmission of pathogens from animals to humans, even if the animals are not actually ill. And as always, there's no need for it to make any sense. The government has just updated its carbon footprint analysis for the year 2022, and this graph shows exactly how the book cooking exercise works. The destruction of the countryside and the crippling of the economy may be shown to bring about a small decline in the production of domestic greenhouse gases, but this is perfectly offset by the increase in imported goods. And finally, the evolution of the biosecurity state is confirmed by the trials of a testing regime called DIVA, which is said to be able to distinguish between cattle which are supposedly infected with TB and those which have been vaccinated. So in conclusion, and as if it were really necessary to reinforce the point that vaccination is only an exercise in control and profit, this announcement says that as with other vaccines, a range of protection is expected. Some animals will be fully or only partially protected after vaccination, whilst others will remain susceptible to the disease.
Okay, thank you for that, Charles. Let's move on and welcome Sandy Adams to the programme. Sandy, you have been looking at the situation locally in many parts of the country with people running campaigns with the local councils and so on, but increasingly you're seeing the use of certain psychological techniques in order to try to regain narratives amongst campaigners.
Yes, particularly last Saturday on the 24th of May, we had a consultation at Glastonbury Town Council. Glastonbury, it was the town hall, and looking at it. I just want to mention firstly that Rosa Koire opened my eyes to the Delphi technique many years ago, because it was used to gain consensus over Agenda 21 all over the United States. And we have to remember that Delphi technique was developed in the 1950s by researchers at the Rand Corporation, which is a think tank with close ties to the US military and government. And really, it's a way to get people together and lead them through a structured process of multiple rounds of questionnaires and feedback, controlled interaction. And it is often used, but, it's misused by NGOs and corporations and education bodies also to steer people into a sort of groupthink and into a predetermined outcome, manufacturing consensus. And we see this happening all over, particularly with net zero. That's how they reached the way to call sort of a climate emergency all over the country. They held these sort of citizens' assemblies, and this is what we're seeing more and more now in Glastonbury. They had this consultation, and people are genuinely worried about the land being taken over, because we've got this WHS scoping exercise happening to make it a World Heritage status town. And it's only a small town, but the fact is that we've seen it happen at Stonehenge and Avebury, where people have actually been locked out of the land, and they have to pay extra to visit the site. I mean, now to get to Stonehenge, a family ticket is £75. It's absolutely mad. Anyway, spiritual people have been locked out of their practices. Druids can only go there on the solstice to Stonehenge, and they've got a big visitors centre now, and everything is really all about tourism. So I'll be talking about that a bit later, about what WHS means to sacred sites later on in the show. But at the moment, I'm dealing with this scoping exercise, and they held these. They put everybody on tables, and of course they had the goals on the table, because it's all, the WHS is all aligned to the 17 goals of Agenda 2030, and they give people biscuits and tea and really lead them through a sort of an exercise about what do they think. There's lots of coloured crayons on the table. It's a bit kindergarten. People visualise, and they kind of, they lead them through this very safe, what appears to be a safe environment, and people are relaxed and come out with things. And of course, they use that data to then form some kind of visioning, brainstorming thing. And first of all, they start with a scoping exercise, and it's how it's all put together. There's a scoping exercise, and then it goes on through other sort of levels, and then you've got the Delphi technique here. which it goes through right from the issue that they lead you through to get their solution. And it is all about manufacturing consensus and bringing people round and putting facilitators on every table so that they're led through this process. And it really is. I mean, what's unfortunate is by the end of it, I think we've got the last slide. I think is how you it's how you actually are led. And really everybody's saying yes to everything, but in their heads they're going, actually, I don't want this, but they're too scared to say something because they want to conform. They want to conform. Can we go back to the previous slide? Sorry, I've jumped the gun a bit. The definition is a change in a person's behavior or opinions as a result of real or imagined pressure from a person or group of people, and the dilemma of being a social animal, because actually, you want to keep your individuality, but you want to conform as well. And the establishment tends to like conformists better than non-conformists. So that's where we stand with all of that.
Sandy, thank you for that. And as I say, we'll be covering more about World Heritage Sites a little bit more a little bit later in the program. Sorry, Vanessa, let me welcome you to the program. Now, last week we were talking about and I don't want to say the word rehabilitation because it's the bit isn't really appropriate, but we're talking about creating a new persona for Jolani in Syria, who is, as we will remind everybody, remains a terrorist who had a price on his head until very, very recently. But last week you hinted at an NGO that I'm not sure that we had fully identified, but we seem to have now, or at least you have, I should say.
Yes, and I would just say, Sandy, that sounds very much like gaslighting, textbook gaslighting, the Delphi program. Yes, we talked last week about effectively the grooming campaign, as I call it, Mike, of Jolani away from being ISIS, Al-Qaeda terrorist to being a legitimate political challenger for power in Syria. And we noted that a former ambassador from the US to Syria, Robert Ford, who was actually kicked out of Syria for inciting riots in 2011, was basically invited by a British NGO to basically put into motion this grooming of Jolani. And yes, I have discovered who it is. It's all written up in a new article at UK Column that was published yesterday, and I do recommend that everybody go and read it. There's an awful lot of detail in there. The Blair Bush project in Syria that brought Al-Qaeda to power. So who was the NGO that was responsible for inviting Robert Ford to meet with Jolani back in March 2023, but actually whose directors had allegedly met with Jolani back in 2021, which of course is when the PBS Frontline initial interview with the kind of suited and booted Jolani was published. The name is Intermediate. It was established in 2011, which is also interesting timing because, of course, that's when the regime change war against Syria began, backed by the US, the UK, Israel, Turkey, and the Arab Gulf states, to name a few. Who are the co-founders of Intermedia? Well, one of them is Jonathan Powell. And you'll be also interested to know that he was appointed as National Security Advisor to Keir Starmer literally weeks before the final fall of Damascus. So again, let's just check the timeline here. So in 2023, they invited Robert Ford to come to Idlib and meet with Jolani. 1 month prior to the fall of Damascus, Powell was taken from Intermedia and made National Security Advisor to Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, of course, is known to be, for want of a better word, the protege of Tony Blair. I actually secured the name of the organization and the name of Jonathan Powell from sources inside Syria, but it was pretty quickly picked up by other media outlets, mostly regional, but this by The National, talking about Britain's influence spreads through New Syria as security chief meets post-Assad leaders. Now, this article in particular goes into a lot of depth about the complex built by UK intelligence in particular that waged the narrative media, charity organization war, including, of course, the formation of the White Helmets in 2013, the regime change war against Syria. So British intelligence is intrinsically embedded in the entire operation to overthrow the Syrian government. This also is an article in French media in the Figaro, written by a well-known French investigative journalist Georges Malbruno, who wrote a book on the regime change war called The Path to Damascus. Here he's talking about al-Sharaa, or Jolani, is dangerously intelligent, and his investigation into the new power in Syria. Now, what is interesting is he also identifies that one of the project managers in Intermediate, Lucy Stewart, who speaks Farsi and Arabic, organized or was given the job, let's say, of grooming other members of Jolani's regime, including the former al-Qaeda founder and current caretaker foreign minister, al-Shaibani, and potentially she probably organized this interview with Tony Blair at Davos with Shaibani, which, if you remember, we played it on UK Column. It was deeply uncomfortable, for want of a better word. But of course, Powell, people will remember, as the chief of staff of none other than the architect of the war against Iraq, and in my opinion, also the architect of the future war against Syria, none other than war criminal Tony Blair. This is Powell with Tony Blair back, I think, during the time of the Iraqi war. Powell, of course, has gleaned credit for his role in peace negotiations in Ukraine and various other countries. But I just want to draw attention to, this is a document that was released as part of the Chilcot inquiry, which shows how Bush and Blair were already planning the war against Syria, even during the war against Iraq. So here they're talking about giving support in building a new partnership with the West and Syria in return for closing down support for Hezbollah and Hamas and helping us over Iraq. He doesn't underestimate the problems of this, but I think it's possible. Again, this is detailed in a lot more, with a lot more information in the article if people want to read a bit more about it. Now, I also want to look at the co-founder of Intermediate, who is Martin Griffiths, and he's named here as now being a chief advisor. But he also has deep connections, as was shown in this 2023 article in Al Mayadeen, ex-UN envoy to Yemen tied to MI6, the secret intelligence services, and the Foreign Office. This was originally picked up in Declassified and then republished by Al Mayadeen. But very clear ties to all of the intelligence agencies, and that includes Powell as well, of course, because, in fact, what was exposed was that Powell, back in 2012, sent an email to Hillary Clinton in which he said, if we can just have the slide, he informed a senior Clinton aide in 2012 that Intermediate works closely with the Foreign Office, the NSC, the SIS in London. IM organizes secret channels between insurgents and governments. Work has begun in Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and Burma. And of course, 2012 is also the time that Jake Sullivan, then advisor to Hillary Clinton, emailed Hillary Clinton, according to WikiLeaks leaks, saying that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And at this time that Powell was sending this email to basically get an audience or to get the interest of Hillary Clinton in Intermediate's work as effectively an intelligence agency outreach organization in Syria, he was convening with Jake Sullivan, who stated that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So I do recommend people read the article just to get far more detail than I've been able to give here on the news, but a fascinating nexus of intelligence, military operatives and so on, leading the war against Syria and now bringing Jolani to power.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now I'm going to say, read the article, but then share the article. Please do. We have to get this type of information out. It is incredible to me that we have national security advisors quite happy to admit that they are running back channel discussions with Al-Qaeda. It shouldn't surprise us because we've been funding it and we've been arming it. But it is nonetheless a public admission of these types of channels and discussions. And that is something that I think almost nobody in the country is aware of, and everybody should be aware of.
Yeah, I quite agree.
Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, you'd like to support us, please do so. We absolutely appreciate and are very grateful for everyone that does support us, but you can make a donation. You can join the UK column as a member and so on. That gets you access to UK column News Extra and other member-only content. But you can pick something up at the UK column shop. That helps us greatly as well. Of course, that helps promote the brand around the country. If you're wearing a T-shirt or a sweatshirt or a cap or have a water bottle. But if you'd like to buy some supplements from clive2carl.com, we also have an affiliate agreement there, which gives us a small percentage of those purchases, although it doesn't cost you any more to do that. If you can't do any of that, please do, as I say, share the material. We've got to get past the censorship regime in this country, and share links are provided on the articles, blogs, and videos on the UK column website. And just go and visit the UK column website because that helps us greatly too. Now, tonight, the question is, are Jews God's own people? That is going to be a very interesting discussion with Jerm at 7 p.m. Are they God's chosen people, I should say, at 7 p.m. tonight on the usual live streams. So do watch that if you possibly can, and let people know that it's on as well. Tomorrow, the interview is with Linda Wharton. So 29th of May, that's tomorrow, Thursday, 1 p.m. Join us for that. And then let's have a look. We've got, Vanessa, very briefly, your discussion with Ben and David Miller on Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, I think it's well worth watching. Simply, I mean, for David's expertise in particular on the connections between Ukraine and Israel, many people may not be aware of it being the cradle of Zionism. Definitely worth watching.
Thank you for that. So that is on the website at the moment, if you didn't see it live. Charles Bob is hosting an event.
He is, and just to avoid disappointment, we're going to demonstrate that twice, I see. But yes, he's got an exhibition called Paradigms up in London, the Cassild Gallery, which is running until the end of this week. So get along to Connaught Street. There'll be a link in the show notes, and that's just an example illustration from this show of his. So do get along there.
Absolutely. Would absolutely encourage that if you possibly can. Okay, let's come back to you, Charles. And well, we've been talking about the recent allegations or the continuing allegations of SAS involvement in murders and so on in Afghanistan. What have you got?
We have, absolutely. And this has been associated or linked to the reports that the government is bound to overturn legislation that was put in by the Conservative government concerning the Northern Ireland legislation, or at least going back to 2023. And it's concerning the prosecutions against British soldiers for actions taken under Op Banner in particular, which ran from 1969 to 2007. And the specific legislation was designed to prevent any further legal action from taking place. It was called is called the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023, something which current government plans to overturn. As I say, now, news of this government's plans have, for obvious reasons, been scrutinised by serving armed forces personnel and veterans alike. And to that end, many regimental headquarters and veterans associations have provided updates to their various distribution lists. And now, what would appear to be a significant step further into the domain of censorship, it's reported here by Sean Raymond in the Mail on Sunday that the Ministry of Defence has weighed in and ordered that such communications stop. Now, this is the second instance of MOD censorship reported on by UK column in recent weeks, the first being the case of the serving Royal Marine who had an online survey taken down after an MOD intervention before he was disciplined and then silenced. And now we have a petition to stop the change to the current legislation being sent round the houses, which is something that I can confirm personally. And this has been interpreted as being outside of the army's scope of political neutrality. Now, the question is, does this constitute a fair interpretation of Queen's regulations, which govern conduct within the army? And specifically, there is a prohibition on comment and the expression of views. And there may well have been instances of such, but the response has been a blanket one, which means that where the information has simply been passed, it is deemed to be politically controversial. Now, Queen's regulations describe a politically controversial topic as one which is, has been, or is clearly about to be a matter of controversy between political parties in this country. Now, it may be the case that such a topic falls into this categorization. That's not to say that any parties are necessarily guilty of comment or expression on the matter. And further, and for context, I think it's pertinent to consider the role of politics in the use of force. And here from the Joint Services publication 398, which deals with the rules of engagement, we're reminded that rules of engagement are one of the key means by which political control is exercised over the use of force and of ensuring that action taken by UK armed forces is lawful. Now, all of that calls into question the way in which the laws of armed conflict and international humanitarian law is interpreted. So the issue brought out by all of this is that of consistency, and not just in the UK. Various governments appear to want to protect people they describe as terrorists whilst prosecuting some of their own soldiers. And at the same time, as in Australia, a former Special Forces soldier has been found to have committed war crimes by 2 civil courts. And as asked by the World Socialist website 2 years ago, why does he face no criminal investigation? So to conclude and highlight the level of disarray and plummeting morale, it's worth listening to the way in which Luke Pollard, currently Armed Forces Minister, plans to lure the young into active service.
We inherited a broken recruitment system from the Conservatives. We promised to take steps to fix it, and we are. The largest pay increase in 20 years for those who serve, 35% pay increase for recruits, scrapped over 100 outdated medical practices, created a new direct entry cyber pathway, a conditional offer within 10 days of applying, and a training start date within 30 days. And we've announced a new tri-service recruitment scheme to attract the very best to our armed forces.
Hardly words to inspire a generation, and I think plenty more to talk about in Extra.
Absolutely. And related then to that, of course, is the issue of online safety, since we're talking about censorship. And Ofcom has commissioned what they call new qualitative research about mis and disinformation, exploring the ways to navigate and mitigate its impact. Now, the report was published by a consultancy called Varian, who Ben has covered extensively, or at least did cover extensively last year, I think in about 5 or 6 different UK column news programs. So if you'd like to search the UK column news archive, you can find out more about Varian themselves. Now, in Ofcom's blog post on this new report, they acknowledged that, quote, "It's important to be clear from the outset that misinformation is a subjective term. There are a range of ways that misinformation can be characterized, which makes it important to understand the wider context of people's attitudes and knowledge." Ofcom very much wants to bring the issue of misinformation and disinformation to the forefront of people's minds. The one we want to amplify here, they say, is making space in our family and social groups for civil society organizations and broadcasters and other news providers to talk about misinformation and disinformation. So they want to make media literacy, quotes, everyone's business. Online platforms, parents, educators, third sector organizations, providers of health and social care, professionals working with children, broadcasters, including public service broadcasters, and others, to realize the full potential of media literacy, they say, in the UK. Contributions and collaboration from all is essential. So they absolutely want fusion on this area. But the report itself, funded by Ofcom, it's perhaps no surprise then that regulation is seen as a major tool to deal with the problem. Regulation and what are described here as validation markers. So the model which they seem to be being imposed or being proposed here is that Ofcom uses regulation to drive people towards the regime narrative, while the likes of NewsGuard, there we go. Sorry, let's bring them back on. The likes of NewsGuard provides the so-called validation markers, and validation markers might be things like scores that the NewsGuard give about the trustworthiness and reliability of particular news outlets. In the meantime, Ofcom has published another blog post, you got a preview of it there, claiming that sports stars and pundits receive huge quantities of online hate, which risks their confidence in their careers and increases a feeling that they will decide to leave social media altogether. Poor souls is what I say. Surely the thing that people with a public profile need is a thicker skin, but since they don't have a thicker skin, instead we're going to see a much more stringent censorship regime. So that's all good stuff, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. Sandy, let me welcome you back to the program then, and let's talk a little bit more about UNESCO and United Nations and World Heritage Sites.
Yes, I mean, obviously, my first slide here is really the fact that UNESCO really are the umbrella organisation for World Heritage. And I did pick up a couple of their things at this consultation, and they do have a policy document. And it's all integrated with the sustainable development perspective. And it's all tied up with, that they meet once a year. And they say they have World Heritage Site is a duty on the state party, and it is achieved through appropriate policies in the development plan of a local authority, and whose parts of are of a management plan. And I started looking at what state party means, and actually it's all about transferring the power from the people of an area into the state, into either their government or the United Nations, and how linked up they are with the WWF, which is quite concerning because the WWF has quite a history of colonialism, which I'll go into a little bit later. But really, what it means, a state party is a nation state that signed and ratified the World Heritage Convention. In this case, it means the United Kingdom government, but actually they are answerable to the United Nations at the end of the day. So they can do what they like. So really, unfortunately, what we've seen in certain World Heritage sites that have been taken over throughout the world, and particularly sacred sites, you've found the displacement of indigenous people. In Kenya, we found it. The Maasai in Africa. They were accused in 2022 of violent removals and the destruction of homes and grazing bans to meet, conservation targets and tourism. I mean, this is just unbelievable what goes on, and it's all in the name of conservation. In Australia, in Uluru, the same thing has happened. Spiritual significance was sidelined in favour of international narratives and tourism, cultural tokenism versus genuine indigenous control. So it's happened in Nepal, it's happened in India. And when you look at the link between the WWF and they are linked. I mean, although they're different entities, all of their frameworks interlink. And we've got the founder members of the WWF. Of course, we've got we've got obviously Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Julian Huxley. Now, all of these were eugenicists, colonialists, who actually were really, and two of them involved quite heavily in the Nazi Party. So we've got this real colonial thing going on, and it's interesting when Prince Philip died, Rushir Sharma said he'd taken a keen interest in sorry, I've lost my slide.
Yeah, I'll read it out here. He had taken a keen interest in religion and conservation despite dispatching a 2.5-meter tiger with a single shot on an official visit to India in 1961.
It was 1961.
Yeah, the same year he became president of the World Wildlife Fund UK.
Yeah, and there is another slide of him with that tiger. in 1961, shot in Jaipur. Now, these people it really is about money. And the whole tourism thing with the WWF is all about financializing nature. This is what they're doing all over the world. And now we've got, the whole carbon thing intertwined with that, with the greenwashing. So we're seeing a land grab of massive proportions with WHS. Yeah.
Yeah, and we shouldn't, Sandy, we shouldn't forget that, Prince Philip began the whole conservation part of this as far as the royal family is concerned. But Prince Charles, and now King Charles, has absolutely continued that legacy. And despite the fact that he said just prior to his coronation that he would be giving up the political activism, he absolutely has not given that up in any way, shape or form.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it. It's tracing how far back it goes, but also the identification of the key part of it, which was money, and specifically other people's money. And we go back to the now King, then Prince of Wales, giving his address in Wales in 1970, talking about people effectively becoming fed up with the subject of what was then ecology. And saying that not only do they need a sort of buzzing PR campaign around it, but they also need to find a way in which to sling the bill around somebody else's neck. And here we are, 50 plus years on, and we see that is exactly what has been prosecuted. So it was very, very cleverly done, and continues to be so because, of course, the vast majority of people do and will go along with it.
Yes. Now, I'm going to say thanks to Brian for sending me this video clip that we're going to watch a second through. But at the weekend on Sunday, Kemi Badenoch, what we call her, the shadow prime minister, perhaps, I don't know, certainly the leader of the Tory party, was on the Trevor Phillips program on Sky. And, well, I'm not going to introduce it much more than that. Let's just have a listen to what Phillips asked her and a short excerpt of what she had to say.
Earlier this week, the Prime Minister joined with Mr. Macron and Mr. Carney in criticising Israel. Mr. Netanyahu responded by accusing him of supporting murderers, rapists, and baby killers. Was the Israeli leader right to say that?
Well, I think the first thing to say on this issue is that if Hamas is praising your actions, you've probably done something wrong. What he has said, he sees this.
People need to know where you stand.
Yeah, but I've been very clear where I stand. Hamas is a terrorist group. They are not our friends.
I'm talking about what you think about the Israelis'
Yes, but it's all related. Who funds Hamas? Iran. An enemy of this country. An enemy of this country. Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the UK, just like Ukraine is on behalf of the Western Europe against Russia.
So here was apparently an open public acknowledgement from a key senior politician that the UK, the two of the key wars taking place at the moment are being pursued on behalf of the UK as proxy wars. I haven't heard any such public acknowledgement like that before. I think it's a pretty incredible statement. It hasn't had any particular coverage as far as I've seen in the mainstream press. What are your thoughts?
Well, one wonders whether it will. I mean, I think it's astonishing the degree to which people can speak out and be completely ignored. If we think that what's built up to this is the number of people who've joined the queue or in so far as having a go at the state of Israel, or in particular Netanyahu, and using the word genocide and this, that, and the other. So a lot of words coming out there, but in actual fact, very, very few or no actions whatsoever. So it's all very well for her to sit there in opposition, supposed opposition, and say something like this. But what can she do about it? Who will she influence in saying it? But no, I mean, I'm sure that her comments will be suppressed as far as they can possibly be.
Yeah, Vanessa, I don't know whether you've seen that clip already, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I had seen it on mostly on Telegram, as you say. It hasn't, unsurprisingly, been picked up by mainstream media at all, because that would necessitate their investigation into the claim a little bit more, and of course they don't want to do that. But I think, there's a lot of truth in what she said, for sure. I would argue that Israel is also fighting a proxy war for the West, the US and the UK, as it has done traditionally since the creation of the Zionist movement. So I think the dog and the tail wag together much of the time.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's come back to you then. What is the latest that's going on in Gaza?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to really apologize because I'm bringing David Lammy back on, and it pained me just as much as it's going to pain all of you to have to listen to him. But let's roll this video.
I'm announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. We will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. Netanyahu's government's actions have made this necessary. Madam Deputy Speaker, today, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, is summoning the Israeli ambassadors to the Foreign Office to convey this message. I say now to the people of Israel, I want a strong friendship with you based on shared values, with flourishing ties between our people and societies. We are unwavering in our commitment to your security and to your future, to countering the very real threat from Iran, the scourge of terrorism, and the evils of anti-Semitism. But the conduct of the war in Gaza is damaging our relationship with your government.
So one might think a tiny glimpse of a cause for celebration there. Well, don't follow that route too quickly, because here is the UK trade envoy, Lord Ian Austin of Dudley in Israel, going to the Cutting Edge Customs Scanning Center, Haifa Bayport, Haifa Nazareth Light Railway Project, and the Technion, whatever that is. So he clearly has absolutely no problem with continuing trade with Israel. As he says in the House very recently, we'd be foolish to sever our trade links with Israel. So he seems to be completely overriding the foreign minister's statement in Parliament. And what does he say in that, which is interesting for me because it basically confirms what we've been saying at UK Column for some time. And note that Lammy actually mentioned the 2030 Israel-UK roadmap in his statement. So what does Lord Austin say? Thousands of jobs in the UK depend on trade with Israel. 1.7 million people work for UK firms exporting goods to Israel. 1 in 8 of the drugs dispensed by the NHS comes from Israeli companies. Every business and family in the country uses Israeli technology in their homes, computers, cars, and phones every day. So simply actually confirming what we've been warning of, and the infiltration by the spy unit 8200 and other tech-based military spy units in Israel. He said very similar things back on May the 13th in The Telegraph, which is known to channel British intelligence agency statements also. British sanctions against Israel would be self-harming and morally wrong. So standing against and boycotting a country that is committing genocide apparently isn't wrong. And what does he say in this article, which again I find very interesting? And let's not forget that during the pandemic, COVID, of course, Britain was able to reap the benefits of Israel's world-leading health strategies, thanks to close cooperation between our two countries. So this raises the question, what exactly were those cooperations and what exactly was the UK reaping an advantage of? He also mentions in that article that in 2024, during the genocide, the UK supplied 3.2 billion in exports to Israel, and they imported 2.5 billion from Israel. And he states that without Israeli tech, RAF planes could not actually get off the ground. And the familiar excuse is that Israel has foiled multiple terror threats. Now, you will remember that Theresa May's government used the same excuse when Saudi Arabia was bombing the Yemenis with British-made bombs. They said that, yes, but Saudi Arabia helps us to foil terror plots on UK territory. So very, very familiar canards being floated out there to try and obscure the fact that Britain is complicit in the genocide in Gaza. And just to remind everyone, as if they really need it, this young girl that we're going to see in the video, if you just want to play and I'll talk over it, Ward al-Sheikh Khalil, you can see the inset photo there. She was the child seen trying to escape the burning tents at the Fahmy al-Jarjawi school. Her mother and 6 siblings were burned alive in that attack by the Zionists. 36 civilians, the majority of which were children, were also burned alive in that attack. And I just want to show this photo, which I find absolutely horrifying. These are the starvation lines kettling young men in Gaza towards the American corporate-run aid centers. And of course, starving people forced into such containment, chaos broke out, and they were then fired upon by the IOF military, and many of them, of course, were massacred. And of course, the response on X to Lord Austin's tweet was, let's say, gratifying. You can freeze frame and read it. I can't read it from here, but just the last tweet the last response from Louis Alday, who's a well-known historian and academic: "You are blood-stained, genocidal demons." Well, I can't really disagree with that.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that tragic report, because, well, what can we say? Again, more complicity from the UK government. It's not just the royal family, it's from top to bottom of the British state. And, well, there are representatives. Maybe we should be doing something about it. But let's move on, Charles, to Elon and Starlink.
Yes, indeed. And in particular, the internet provided by Starlink, getting away from the internet, of course, becoming harder and harder. And this now applies to air travel, where Elon Musk's array of low Earth orbit satellites are delivering Wi-Fi directly into aircraft. And here's the Starlink pitch for attracting customers. Airlines, of course, have signed up in their droves, like Qatar, nobody wanting to be left behind by their competitors. But what is neither considered nor discussed, apparently, is the impact of such a development. It's reckoned that Musk has approximately 7,000 such satellites flying at the moment, with a projection that tens of thousands will be in low Earth orbit within decades. Now, as to the use of wireless internet in aircraft, there's no safety data. And as usual, the line will simply be that there's no known adverse effect. So in short, if you don't look for it, you can't find it. The other and very much related issues concern the lifespan of the satellites. Now, as though a revelation, and certainly one that would put paid to the climate change story, if anyone were listening, the New Scientist reports on the devastating effects of solar storms and the overall effect of the sun on, lo and behold, temperature and climate. We're in a period described as a solar maximum, or at least have been recently, a term almost guaranteed to be omitted by any so-called climate scientists. Now, this means that damage is being done to the satellites far faster than anticipated, which means that many more will be sent up to compensate. And it also means that the way in which they're meant to disintegrate is being called into question, raising the possibility of collision with aircraft. Now, the odds of such a thing happening are written off or written about dismissively by mainstream commentators, which presumably will continue to be the case until there is a collision. So here we have yet another example of the unthinking application of a form of technology just because it is possible and with no regard for the consequences. So we might go on to talk about that a little bit more in extra.
We should remember, of course, that SpaceX has form on this, because the recent Starship launches have resulted in 2 separate incidents of aircraft having to escape a particular area of airspace as quickly as possible. And of course, this puts air travelers at risk, because as soon as you get into this type of emergency situation where air traffic control is having to move people out of the way as quickly as possible, the risks of, there are collision avoidance systems, but nonetheless, this is not healthy situation?
It doesn't seem so. And as I say, it's just something that never gets talked about, never gets thought about, apparently, and they just push on regardless. So, sort of the fingers crossed approach. Now, in terms of fingers crossed, or indeed fingers being manipulated, we'll just finish off with something that might not necessarily seem credible, but is absolutely true. And I take you to the website of Enhanced, declaring that the future of sports is here, pointing us towards the Enhanced Games in Las Vegas in 2026. And this is something that is designed to celebrate augmentation of the human form, or put better, transhumanism. So here we see performance enhancements, scientific and technological advancements, of course, a range of well-groomed people supporting such an initiative. But as with all these questions, all these things, we have to ask the question, if we want to evolve humanity, as they say here, who's putting the money behind it? And lo and behold, there is Peter Thiel, the headman, founder at PayPal and Palantir, of course, running most of the British government projects, and indeed behind this grotesque spectacle of a celebration of, frankly, the corruption of the human form. So I'm not sure how many people will be tuning into those games in Las Vegas, or indeed whether medals will be awarded for performance or for the degree of augmentation and adaptation to a particular human. We may cover it, we may not.
Yes. Undoubtedly, we'll be talking about that in Extra as well, amongst other things. I'm going to say thank you very much, Charles, Vanessa, and Sandy, for your contributions today, and thanks to everybody for watching. We'll be back in a few minutes if you're a UK Column member for the UK Column News Extra. If you're not a member, please consider joining us for Extra. Enjoy Germ tonight at 7 p.m, the interview tomorrow at 1 p.m, and we will be back on Friday at 1 p.m. for another news. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.